Welcome to our very first Women in Sports podcasting panel put on by the Sports Podcast Awards. I'm Jackie Daly. I'm your host today. And joining me this morning are three hugely influential women in the U.S. sports podcasting scene, CEOs, hosts, athletes. These women have done it all. And it's an honor, honestly, to have you guys here with me today. But not only that, they all have played a part in shows that have been shortlisted in the very first Sports Podcast Awards, with the winner's announcement now at this point, less than 6 weeks away. And a little bit about the Sports Podcast Awards. We were created to globally unite the sports podcasting community, from grassroots creators all the way through to elite level podcasters, anything in between. We want to celebrate the sports podcast community. So let's meet these really influential and amazing women that I have here with me today. First up, we have Caroline Fitzgerald. As CEO and founder of Goals Sports, Caroline is passionate about the women's sports and the business of women's sports and supporting this industry, bringing more money into this industry. Caroline hosts the Business Case for Women's Sports podcast, which is a podcast that's dedicated to the business side of women's sports. And this podcast has been shortlisted in the Best Sports Business Podcast category. Welcome, Caroline. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Jackie. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's wonderful to be here among all of this wonderful sports industry brain power. So really appreciate the opportunity and the platform.
Yes, we're so happy to have you here. So welcome. Next up, we have Chinny Nwagbo. She was a high school basketball prodigy to an international basketball star. She's the current director at Peace Players Baltimore, where she hosts the Play It Forward podcast. And Chinny is currently working also with the U.S. Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs Sports Diplomacy Program. And her show has been shortlisted in the Best Equality and Social Impact category. Welcome, Chinny.
Thank you so much. Thank you for getting my name right too, Chinny Nwagbo, right on spot. So yes, I'm excited to be here with all these amazing, strong women and voices, and I'm sure this conversation is going to be amazing. So thank you very much.
Yes, I'm loving it. Thank you so much. And to round out the panel, we have Olivia Harlan Dekker as a sports reporter. She is a force in this largely male-dominated industry. She currently hosts BetMGM's Unleashed podcast, where it mixes her love of sports, comedy, lifestyle, all of the above. This podcast has been shortlisted in the Best Comedy Podcast. Olivia, welcome. How are you today?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me on. Podcasting is such a new space for me. We're less than a year in, and I feel like I'm learning every day. So it's an honor for you all to recognize our show, because we love it. We work really hard on it, and to be with these other women is pretty special. Thank you. I'm honored.
Yes, and I am honored to be hosting this panel. When we decided we were going to spotlight some women, I was like, I'm in the right place. I'm passionate about sports, podcasting, all of the things with women in the sports industry. So this is really exciting for me too. So let's dive into it. We'll start kind of and go in the same order where I introed you. But the first question is, how did you get into podcasting? Caroline, you can go first.
All right, I'll kick it off today. I'm a new podcaster as well. So Olivia, we're same camp there. I started podcasting during the pandemic. So I was at home. I was watching the 2020 WNBA season, which was an incredibly powerful season for a lot of reasons. The players dedicated their season to fighting for racial and social justice. Right in the thick of the pandemic. They were one of the first teams to have a successful bubble. It's just really powerful for a lot of reasons, not to mention the incredible basketball that they play. And I'm watching the WNBA season, and I became really, really interested in the intersection of athlete activism and sports business. And there were a lot of naysayers. I'll be kind to those naysayers. Maybe I shouldn't, but I will be. And they were saying things on Twitter like the athletes need to stick to sports and shut up and dribble, and just like like we hear a lot telling athletes to keep politics out of sports. And what I was noticing, though, is that in the season that the WNBA was the most active politically, probably in the history of any sports team, league, etc., in the history of sport, they were having an incredibly successful business year. They were having record-breaking viewership, sponsorship sales, merchandise sales. And I just became really, really interested in, again, that intersection of activism and sports business. So I wanted to listen to a podcast about it. So I went on to Spotify and looked for one, and I couldn't find one. So I was like, Caroline, why don't you start a podcast? So that's kind of how the idea came about. And I really wanted to just learn. So started this podcast, The Business Case for Women's Sports, to bring on leaders in the women's sports industry so I could learn from them about the business of women's sports and amplify their voices and just start to have these conversations around why it's such a good investment for brands, networks, individuals to invest in women athletes. So that's it in a nutshell.
Caroline, I want to say that's an amazing answer. And also I want to say the intersectionality between sports activism and business has been around for quite some time, right? I think what's happening now is that we have the platforms to raise those conversations around the world, but we've seen that really prominent in the Olympics, right? For years, where people have taken the Olympics as a form of sport, but also a form of activism to protest or to speak out against the things that they believe in or to uplift the people that they're representing. So I think your podcast, I didn't even know it existed, but when they asked me the question of what's the best podcast, I'm going to say yours. So awesome.
Well, that's very kind. I think you're right. It's definitely not a new concept. And it's really powerful. Sport is such a tremendous vehicle for larger social transformative change. And I'm excited to talk about that in the intersection of women's sports specifically, because women athletes, just just being a woman in sports is a form of activism, in my opinion. So it's fun to talk about and learn about it.
Perfect. That was awesome. What about you, Chinny?
So I have a special case. So I work for Peace Players International, an amazing organization that uses, as you said, the transformative power to bridge the divide in conflicting communities. And so we're all over the world. We got started in 2001 in South Africa under the premise that if we can play together, we can live together. And so then we moved to the Middle East, we moved to Northern Ireland, Cyprus, and now we're in the United States in LA, Chicago, Brooklyn, Detroit, and Baltimore. Bridging those divides there. But my role came in part from working here and us deciding that we're going to have a podcast. And so I interviewed for the role immediately. I've done, sports podcasting in the past, but been a guest analyst for News Channel 7 in the sports area. Mm-hmm. And I'm a professional athlete of 11 years. So sports is my area and I love talking about it. But what was more unique to the position at Peace Players is that we're talking about sports for social change, social justice, and sports in a way, as you said, Caroline, that lifts up a platform that helps bridge those divides when we talk about pay equity, pay disparity in women and men, or when we talk about racial injustice or systemic racism in the United States. But that intersectionality between sports and having a space to talk about it and have those uncomfortable conversations, but also having the leverage to talk about it because sports provides that space where people can feel a little bit more comfortable about talking about the things that matter. So once the job was available, I immediately,
you were in.
Yes, and here I am. So yeah, I'm learning. This is brand new to me, but it's a wonderful and amazing space to be in, to be able to use your voice in a way that serves something greater than yourself. And I'm really happy about this conversation, but the many more conversations to come in the future. So that's how I got involved, and that's why I'll stay, and that's why I'm happy about this space. So
that's so amazing, because all three of you have essentially told me that this is a new venture for you, and look at where you are. You're in the top 8 of a category in the first ever sports podcast awards. Like, that's so amazing. I just wanted to know that because I'm proud to be here with you guys. And so, Olivia, what about you? How did your show come about? How did you get your start in podcasting?
Well, yes. And first, I want to add on to what Chinny was saying is I think basketball especially has the roots to do that. We've done some trips with Basketball Without Borders, and that's through the NBA. Incredible organization. We go all over the world. And, basketball, when you compare it to other sports, you only really need a couple tools, right? You need a little space, 2 hoops, and a ball. And it's incredible how global that sport is and only getting bigger. So and we're just talking about men in that point. And then you add in WNBA, youth women's basketball. It's just incredible. Yes. So you do incredible work. And I think basketball has the opportunity, like you said, if we play together, we can live together. What a great line. So that's powerful stuff. And it's cool to have the opportunity to see it firsthand. And it's great you're just advocating and talking more about it and using your platform. Mine sounds like a lot less serious after that. And again, we are on the sports comedy platform. And I think what our show goal was ultimately is let's do sports light. Let's make it digestible. Let's give you headlines, but not slam you with it. If you want to listen to Bill Simmons, you can listen to Bill Simmons. We're not that. We're fun, all that. And that's such a difference for me because I come from ESPN as a sideline reporter, NFL, college basketball, NBA with the Atlanta Hawks was kind of how I got in the business, and then college football. And when you're used to just taking it so seriously, which is great, you've got to do that on game coverage. And you cover tough topics too, but then going from the levity to a sports podcast where we can have just the best of sport and just fun with it and great guests, it's been really refreshing for me. And you need a good co-host, and Giannis Pappas is fantastic, and we have a lot of fun. But it has shown me that there are so many layers to this business. I want to be working forever, and there are so many ways to work in sports on the business side, on the broadcasting side, and podcast is so new to me, but it's been a great challenge, and it also is a great way to reach different people, reach different audience who aren't sitting there and watching the game, but rather doing it on their own time and maybe just want that sports light and to hear the headlines and to laugh. At the end of the day, if you're making people laugh, you're doing something right.
Agreed. Absolutely. Amazing answers. I think being a woman in sports is a really powerful place to be. And you all have spoken to that. So that's awesome. Now, being new to podcasting, how have you kind of got it off the ground or marketed the show? I know you all seem to have it's not just you grassroots in your bedroom, you have other people behind you. So it's like you have a little bit help along the way, but I'm interested to hear how things took off and how you're kind of getting it out there so people can digest this audio. Caroline.
Yeah, I can kick us off. Yeah. So, when I had the idea to start the podcast, I was like, so who's going to listen to this podcast? I'm one of 8 kids. So I was like, okay, so I have 7 listeners with my siblings. Maybe my mom will tune in. Like, who is going to listen to what I have to say? Cause I didn't work in the women's sports industry. I was working in the running industry at the time. So for me, I was like, you know what? All right, let's fire up the Instagram and Twitter and start some channels that just start putting out content about the business of women's sports. So I did that for about 6 months. It was a 6 months marketing build up to launch the podcast, to really build a community of people that were interested in that content. And it was a long road to that point, but I wouldn't do it any other way because really, again, built that community and got to connect with a lot of amazing people. So that's kind of how it worked. So we have a few more listeners other than my mother and my siblings, which is great. But yeah, that's how Goals did it. But I know everybody's story is a little bit different. Chinny, I know you're next. So excited to hear how your launch went.
So, as you mentioned, we have a team in terms of Marcoms and communication. But I think what really brings the listeners in, and hopefully, Caroline, we can get 7 of those listeners, of your siblings, to listen to us too. No, but I think what brings the listeners in is the guests and the topics, and that helps a lot with getting more people to listen. We've had amazing guests. Len Elmore of the NBA, Harvard grad, is still very heavily in the sport. Renata Simmerl of LA 84, amazing work there, as well as, I don't know if you guys know Amadou Gallo Fall, the godfather of NBA Africa. And we've had, Don Showalter of the USA Basketball, director there. But we've had them on and we haven't just talked about sports, right? We've talked about things surrounding sports, but then also how they're using their platform to lift others. We've talked about being women in this industry that's heavily male dominated and how they're using their platforms to ensure that they're bringing other women, qualified women, on board. So we've had an array of different conversations that pull the ears of everyone, even our youth, right? So we make our show in a way that we talk about heavy hitting things, but it's like you said, Olivia, digestible for anyone who's listening. And it's quite innocuous, the space, but the questions are hard hitting, but the space is innocuous in that, it's not like we're pointing the finger at people, but more like, okay, talk to us, let's have a conversation. And I think just by having a conversation that people want to listen to or even be a part of, that's what helps get more listeners, right? We've had, and also being an international organization helps too, right? Because we got people all over the world listening who are sharing with others. But that's just this long and short of it from what I know on my end, being the host, because I can't speak to how amazing our Marcom's communication team is and all the technical details that they put into making sure that, we're lifted up on every platform. So that's what I know. And I'm gonna toss it behind my back to Olivia.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, we're the same. And the thing is, my co-host is a comedian, like a touring, well-known comedian who can say anything he wants and it's funny. I'm a sports reporter. I'm a little bit more buttoned up. And so we have different audiences. That's what I always tell our marketing team, who does a fantastic job, is the clips that work for Giannis are not the clips that work for me. So if it's a former football player and we're having him preview the Super Bowl, give me the nitty gritty X's and O's. Give me that to post. My audience wants that. Give Giannis the funny thing he said while he was signing off, and so it's know your audience, but also work within your scope. Who do you want to attract as a listener? And for me, it's a little bit more sports heavy, just because I know so many of my followers are following me for that reason. So work with them. Don't force anyone's hand. But marketing and social media is such a big part of this. If you were silent on all of that, who would find you? And but I know how you feel, Caroline, when you get started. You're like, oh gosh, who's gonna listen to this? Yes. And in some weeks my mom doesn't listen, and that's when I get really offended.
Moms always have to be our biggest supporters, right?
Yep.
Another powerful woman, obviously, in our lives. So getting the podcast off the ground, you're creative, you have people that are helping you, but with each episode, how do you come up with the ideas of what you're going to put out for each episode?
That's a great question, and I'll take this one if you don't mind, Caroline. So we have a whole team. So Emmett Shepard is my co-host, amazing and brilliant. It was actually his idea. He was the seed, and we're just watering it. And then we have Life, who is our director, amazing. And then LeBaron, we call him Doc, and he edits. I mean, the fantastic editing and, getting the crap that we say out and putting all that good stuff in, that's all him. And so we sit down and we strategically talk about the things that matter. And what's, I think, great about our show is that we do talk a lot about sports, but then we also do guests who are not in the sports industry, but what they've done is correlated to sports. And we find a very fun and fantastic way to incorporate sports into that. But we sit down and it's strategic and we talk about the things that matter. We just had a meeting 2 days ago about what we're looking to do for season 3 and making sure that we are actually leaning into being talking about sports equity, talking about the problems and the issues in the world and making sure that we're highlighting those in all of our episodes and not just having a good time, but having a good time that matters and speaks to everyone who's listening to it. So that's kind of what we do. We just strategically sit down and map out what we want to say and what those guests look like. And hopefully, we throw our fishing line and we hope that someone wants to be on the show. And that's kind of what we do. So
amazing.
Yeah, I can jump in here. It's pretty similar with goals, thinking about what are the stories we want to tell, who are the voices that we think need to be heard. The business case for women's sports, as far as I can tell, I've done a lot of research on this, is the first podcast dedicated solely to covering the business of women's sports. So to me, it feels like there's like almost unlimited guest potential because there are so many people working in the women's sports industry, and there hasn't been a ton of room for them to talk about what that experience is like. So we look at current events. So there's been a lot of podcasts that have come out based on something that happened. We had right after last year when at the NCAA basketball championships, March Madness, with the disparities between the men's and women's locker rooms and all many disparities and problems we saw there. We had a lawyer come on and talk about Title IX and what that looks like with the NCAA, which is actually not held accountable to Title IX. I learned on that podcast, which is really interesting. So, sometimes current events play in when new data comes out, new stories come out, we try to share that. But then also just trying to tell the stories of people that have been doing the work and in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to a current event that happens. So it's a lot of fun. Every single time someone comes on, I learn a ton and it's great.
That's great. That's awesome. I always said, if you're not learning, you're not doing something right. And I feel like you guys are proving that you're always learning in your podcast adventures. So what about you, Olivia?
Yeah, I really try to stay strict on the sports schedule. Obviously, we've gone so NFL heavy the last months gearing up for the Super Bowl. And now we really pivot to NBA. But then at that point, you kind of abandon NBA in March for March Madness. And so we're really strict on the sports schedule. But it's tough to feel like you are covering the world of sports when your guest is from one of the leagues and you're trying to make sure that you're setting the stage right for them, because we have open, guest interview, close, like so many do. But a perfect example of how do you prepare for and what topics do you cover. This week we just had Ryan Leaf on from the NFL. He's an analyst now. He's on Sirius XM. He's been on ESPN. But his whole story is his battle with addiction. And he's served jail time, prison time. And we kept saying, do we go there? Do we keep it football? And I think that's something in any interview, whatever platform it's on. Do we hammer this to death that he goes around speaking about, that is his platform, or do we keep it about the Super Bowl and make it easy? And I said, let's gauge where he takes us first. And the first answer, we asked him something about how his Super Bowl week was, and he goes there. And if they're going there, you follow. And so I like just a good interview, whatever the topics you plan to talk about, you've got to pivot. So I loved, and then we had the most enlightening conversation about CTE in the NFL and about addiction and about mental health in sports. And we barely talked about the Super Bowl, and I think it was one of our best interviews yet. But here we were in our planning calls, and we're saying, let's really do the Super Bowl justice and finish out talking about it and his thoughts on it, and then we're gonna go on to basketball. And it ended up one of the deeper conversations we've had on our show, which is supposed to be light. And we talked about the issue with CTE and will his son play football? His answer was no. He's a number 2 draft pick. And he said, my son's not playing football. I know way too many players playing with CTE. I live with CTE. So it was great content. And another quick thing I'll say on that note is he did a bunch of interviews on Radio Row and everything Super Bowl week. The LA Times did a feature on him. And he said he brings it up every interview he does. CTE, it's an issue. And he said they miraculously get cut from a lot of interviews, that one topic. So it's kind of cool that I can say with confidence, it's not getting cut from this interview. So it's a cool platform that I feel, I'm not editing, but I feel like I have a lot of ownership of the show.
That's great. That's really important. And to speak about CTE, I'm passionate about people knowing about this because it's so important what these athletes deal with. And that just breaks my heart that he had to say that it gets cut. Like, this is something people need to know about. So I'm happy that you have a lot of ownership and that this topic will get talked about on your show. That's awesome. Very, very
Olivia, I have a question because it sounds amazing, your show. And we just did, sometimes we do bonus episodes, for example. So it's, it's Black History Month. There's no way you can't talk about sports and not talk about Black History Month, right? And so we talked about, this is like really deep, and I don't know if you guys have talked about it, but Brian Flores and him suing the NFL. And we made
perfect
that
example.
For example. So hearing your show, I'm thinking, okay, I love the fact that you talk about X and O's, but like what you said, it's so important. It's pivotal to be able to pivot and talk about the things that matter and allow your guests to go there, because that's what makes the show so organic and amazing, and people want to listen to that stuff. So happy to hear that that's your thing, your jam, and that's our jam over here too. So
yeah. And Chinny, to add to that, we had Terrell Owens on last week, and we were playing a fun game with him, which is kind of on theme for our show. And we said, okay, we said it was here's the catch. We said you get to be an NFL coach and you get to pick your salary, pick your team, pick your city, but you're the kicking coach, or we made some joke like that. And he said, well, first of all, that's your first thing, is that I'd be an NFL head coach. And he made a joke about that, but we went there. And I said, Tio, what are your thoughts on what's going on with Brian Flores in the NFL and the systematic racism we see with head coaching hires? And again, to pivot and just to listen and to take a Black man who's played in this industry, and I don't think he has interest in coaching, but he knows the reality of it. And fascinating to have him talk about it. So I totally agree. There are so many issues we can touch on. Even if you're a silly sports comedy show, go there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. No, that's bomb. That's the bomb.
Yep. And it's crazy too, because Olivia, like you're saying, oh, it's supposed to be more lighthearted, but as somebody who is passionate about sports and passionate about the storylines, and these are the real stories that happen, you can't help but go there. You can't help but be like, I need to bring light to this because I'm talking about it and I can't talk about it without bringing this up. So I commend you all for having a platform to be able to talk about the hard things. I know it's really not easy. Sometimes it's never easy to talk about the hard things. So that's awesome. And to keep it kind of in a little bit of a hard place, being a woman, being in sports, being in podcasting, what sort of adversities have you faced, if any? Who wants to start? I'll leave it open.
I was going to see if Olivia, because if you wanted to kick this one off, because I know I'm very new to media and podcasting and being a voice and a personality. And I know you are front of the camera, have been in sports media for a long time. Would love to hear your answer to this to start.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have a very unpopular answer on this one, actually, because I'm asked it all the time.
Yeah.
I never felt when I turned on the TV as a little girl that I couldn't be on TV talking about sports. Now I'm 28 years old. If I was 48 years old, 58 years old, 68 years old, that wouldn't have been the case. So I always say, growing up in the 90s, when I did, I saw women on TV talking about sports. How amazing is that? And I say it with such humility of gratitude that so many women did do that. You look back at, still, there's this one interview with Bear Bryant on the Alabama sideline, and Leslie Visser, maybe, I'm trying to think of who the sideline reporter was, but one of the first females on a football sideline, and he's completely inappropriate and sexist, and it just oozes out of your screen, and you're just cringing. And of course, I've had examples where I'm in a coach's meeting, and it's me and my analyst and my play-by-play and my producer, all men, and the coach, and I'm noticing he's not answering my questions, and I'm noticing he's hardly making eye contact, and of course I've noticed that. But that being said, then make sure you're the most prepared person in that room so that when they say something, you have a really smart follow-up and then you have their attention. So yeah, do you have to work a little bit harder? And what, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers dance backward in heels? Of course, but I feel really fortunate to have grown up in the time I have when I can turn on the TV and see women on sports covering it. So that's kind of an unpopular answer because I am younger, and I do feel like a lot of women say it's really hard. It's still very sexist. One more thing on that from a sideline reporter's point of view is restrooms. In some older stadiums, there are no women's restrooms near the field. The old stadiums. Now there are. Now there are female officials changing rooms, which is fantastic. Again, even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. And now there are nursing rooms near the field for nursing mothers who are working either with the team's PR, sideline reporter, whatever it is. So to see that with my own eyes in the last 10 years in the business, and that's just from a almost logistics standpoint, I think that reflects a lot of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. That's amazing. What about Chinny? What about you?
Oh, Caroline, I saw you come off mute. I don't know if you want to take it, but I'm happy to go there. I'm actually really brand new in this space. And so, Olivia, when you were talking, I was thinking, you said women, and I'm thinking, my lens is always going to be women of color, right? You were able to see women. Were you seeing women of color?
No.
And exactly.
Yep.
And so
You're so right.
So it's great that you were able to see women. And I think my lens, as I mentioned, is going to talk about just always women of color and being able to have that opportunity and see that. But have I faced or been a part of any discrimination in any kind of sort through podcasting? No. But I've only been in this space for about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do see, if we can take it from me as the podcaster and more in terms of the conversations we have, is the position we've been placed in to really open that view and that perspective. So I do. Sometimes when we interview men, they talk about their experiences, and in that, although we may not have questions around it, for example, there was a guest that we had, and he talked about his big break and how he got this amazing job in the NCAA, and it happened to be over the golf course. So it wasn't in the script, but I had to say, did you know that one of the qualms of being a woman is the fact that we don't get those types of privileges, that access to conversations on the golf course, because most women are not on the golf course. And he had no idea of that. He was like, it's just, we're just talking with the guys, and I got my job on the golf course. And it's one of those. So I will say that there is a lot of great space to be able to really lean into leadership as a woman in this role. And so I haven't experienced those discriminations, or seen any inequities in terms of just me in this space, because Peace Players is a really great job of pushing all women forward. So that's all I have to say. I mean, I wish I had more. Yes, I have, but no, not really. So yeah.
Well, both of those were incredible answers. So thank you guys for going first. For me, I'm new to this, about a year and a half. I feel like a lot of adversity maybe lives in my own head. Talking about the business of women's sports, there's definitely some imposter syndrome there. Who am I to come in here and start this podcast and try to be an authority on women's sports business? Why do I get to do this? So I think that's really real, and that's something I fight against every day. I think a lot of women in the sports space face that. We're coming into a space that was built by men for men, and now here we are kind of as an afterthought coming in. So I think that's real. Also, there can be a lot of trolls on social media, and I know you're not supposed to listen to them, but they're there. And as we put out content about why it's good business to invest in women's sports, we hear it all, from women can't dunk and no one watches women's sports, and just the litany of sexist remarks that go. So that's try to put out the noise, or shut out the noise, and listen to the community of supporters. But that's always there. It's an ever-present thing with, I believe, all women in sport. So
Yeah.
I want to add one more thing. That was great, Caroline. I want to add one more thing that I didn't say, and that we kind of all touched on, but we didn't say directly. So we know that the opportunity is not as rich for men. But I would say another thing that I've really listened to and heard is just pay disparity, right? Women who do a phenomenal job, but don't get the phenomenal pay to go along with it. And so that's an issue that I hear. I don't personally experience that, but a lot in terms of broadcasters, podcasters, just women in that space.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Olivia. I would ask you only because you have a lot of experience. Have you witnessed or heard anything like that, or been a part of that space?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, and again, this is so specific to the sideline reporter role, which is men and women now. In fact, I feel like ESPN's making a big push of making it former players. So for football, that hurts women sideline reporters. So that is a thing. But I think in general, it's like if you're looking at the pay structure of who's on a game broadcast, the sideline reporter's the first to go. And I learned that the hard way in COVID, because when they had to cover games and they were like, oh, we got to do this bare bones. Okay, we'll cut the sideline reporter and we'll cut 3 cameras. Great, problem solved, game covered. And so that is why the sideline reporter is for sure the lowest paid of that totem pole. And Caroline, what you said too really got something in my brain going, is that what's in your head, and especially being camera facing, front facing. After I'd finish a game, I'd be like, man, I killed that. My interview was so good. My injury report was so good. I covered that game. I did my job. And I'd get on Twitter and it'd be like, why are your teeth like that? Your makeup looks horrible. You look like a tranny, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay. You're so ugly. You have no business being on camera. I've seen it all. And so that's not in your head. That is real. Those are real people out there who just have evil in their heart. And at the end of the day, I think, well, what does my boss say? Did my boss just text me, great game today? Because that to me that's what I need. I would love to hear that. And then these silly people, I don't care so much. But I think to be a woman in sports, whether it is the example I said in that meeting when no one's even making eye contact with you and you've got to have that quick thing, well, blah, blah, and then that you have their attention, or if it's having a thick skin, I love the idea of being wherever you are in whatever space. And I assume in business, it's more of that, more the golf course, more the boys club. But I do think that if you're just that much tougher, you can thrive. So I like to think that that's where I've kind of cut my teeth.
Yeah. Speaking of, you bring up boys club, which segues perfectly into my next question is, what would you tell a woman or girls, like up and coming, growing up girls that were interested in being in this space when they have reservations, like this is a guys only club? What would you say to that girl or woman?
I mean, very simply that you belong here and you deserve to be here.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
100%. So I've not been that type of woman ever in my life. So
right.
I would just tell them to do exactly what your heart tells you to do and silence all the noise. Never compare yourself to a man, because in most cases women are better. But definitely lean into that space. Just because it's male dominated doesn't mean your voice isn't needed there, and doesn't mean your voice will not change things, because it will be the seed that these male-dominated societies need to grow and ensure that you're around men, because there are a lot of men who will lift women up. Find those men and have them be mentors, and find other women who are doing the same thing, and surround yourself with those people, and definitely follow your dreams. This is a space for everyone. So
I think it's not enough to get there. You got to stay there. Like I mentioned, seeing someone someone to look up to, and there's great Olympic commercials right now you see, especially with women, and they look up and they see a woman competing who looks like them, and then it flashes forward and they do it. That's a perfect example of what we've got to do. And I'm pregnant right now, actually, and this is another that spin on it, is that you kind of think in your head, my God, when I start a family, it's done for me. I'm like, just put me in the ground, I'm done. And it gives me more ambition than ever. And I'm having a boy, and I want him to grow up seeing his mom doing this and doing the damn thing. And it's important to me. And to ultimately that will shape the kind of man he is and the kind of woman he's looking for. And that's a complete tangent, but that you see so many women now having families, being wives and mothers, and not missing a beat. It's really inspiring, not missing a beat. And it is funny. I've told my producer on the show, okay, baby's due May 14th. Can you just give me the end of May? Like, I just have those 2 weeks. And he's like, no, but we'll figure something out. And, but, also I feel very fortunate in that sense is I don't really need a maternity leave traditionally because you guys see my little nephews running around. You can still do this and have your life and be able to not do it all. I think that's a cheesy phrase, but you're able to lead what life you want. So I do feel so confident I can be a host, a podcaster, a sideline reporter, and a mother, and that's empowering.
Olivia, and I want to say congratulations. And what's so great about your platform is you see so many women leaning into, if they decide to be pregnant, their pregnancy and just going with it. Like, it's so when you say don't miss a beat, I think to go deeper, they're so transparent with the days that they're not having a good day or the days that they are having a good day. It allows other women to be like, oh, okay. They normalize being a normal woman. Like, they normalize being a woman. And so that's what I love about that space. So congratulations to you. Please, do the belly, the water walk and have the kids around, because this is life. This is what it's about. And so, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's so exciting.
I just want to congratulations you as well. And you talking about how you're having a boy, we talk a lot and how you are excited for your son to see you doing what you do. We talk so much about how little girls can see women in these leadership positions in sports, but how important is it for boys to see women in leadership positions in sports? So thanks for bringing a little boy into this world to see a strong woman doing what she does. It's really wonderful.
Oh, yes. Congratulations. That's so exciting. Very cool. Now it's been a little bit, so I think I would love to do some rapid fire questions with you guys and then see if you want to add a little bit more, and then we'll close up. So what is your favorite podcast of all time besides your own? Caroline.
I really love, and this is probably no surprise, the Just Women Sports podcast. They highlight stories of women athletes. They're incredible. Everybody check it out.
Next.
I'll go. Mine's kind of cheesy. I love when I get to unplug a little bit and I'm going to today take a walk on the beach. I like listening to Wayne Dyer or something spiritual. And that's just a cool thing about podcasting is that, here my show couldn't be more different than really what I'm digesting a lot of the time. And podcast has from true crime to something informational like what you all are doing to something fun. But what I like to listen to, I would say, is either Oprah, Super Soul Sunday, or Wayne Dyer.
Love it.
Olivia, boom, right there. Oprah,
Yep.
Super Soul Sunday. And I have to be completely transparent and honest. I need to do better. Because when you said, what do you like to listen to? I'm thinking, what? Free time. Do I have to listen to anything?
I know.
But I'm going to go with Oprah all the way. That's my girl. That's it. That's it. Caroline, I don't know about that one, but drop me a little DM so I can listen to that too. But yeah.
Coming your way.
Olivia, it's not cheesy. Spiritual, I don't know if we're supposed to say that.
It's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important. I think we all forget too that we're not machines. We need to have something like that come into our lives, because otherwise, if you digest everything that you only what you're creating, where's there room to have some more space in your mind, So I'm happy to hear that your favorites are a little bit different than what you're creating. I think that makes you a better podcaster overall to get all of that. Very cool. Dream guest, rapid fire, go.
Oprah. I know she's not sports, but that you
doesn't
said
matter.
Dream. You didn't say
Anyone.
sports. Okay.
Anyone. Oprah.
Michelle Obama.
Serena Williams.
Serena. Caroline, you took mine.
I was going to say a duo, Serena and Venus. And I've gotten to interview Venus before, and she's fantastic.
Yeah.
But Serena, I mean, just from a medal standpoint, I would just love to talk to Serena. But yeah, I think it's interesting too. All three of us mentioned women. I mean, it's especially in the sports space, there's so many athletes like Steph Curry comes to mind. LeBron. I'd love to talk to whoever's best right now. Matt Stafford. I'd love to hear Matt Stafford's thoughts on this last game. But truly, when you think of like GOATs and someone who that episode would live a lot longer than almost any other guest you could get, Serena Williams would be fantastic.
Fantastic.
Amazing. I would have said the same. I would have said Oprah, and I probably would have said Serena Williams or Hillary Knight, who plays for the U.S. women's hockey team. I'm a big fan of hers. Gold medal game tonight, by the way. Very excited. And it's so funny with hockey. You watch these women, and you would never know they are fast, strong, aggressive, just like the male counterparts. So I'm very excited. Anyway, so that rounds out our panel. I do want to go around, and if there's something that I didn't ask you about, if you feel like there's something you want to let our community know about you, about your show, or anything about podcasting or anything in general like that, I would love to have you tell us. And then I'll mention where we can vote and all of that. So is there anything else that you guys want to let our listeners and viewers know?
I think just one thing I would say, switching from more traditional journalism to podcasting, is the best part of it is long form. And Chinny, you mentioned earlier, like having creativity with interviews and to bring up that unscripted question and all that. And anytime my producer's like, hey, we're 25 minutes in, hey, 30 minutes in, I go, no, that we're not here for that. I've had producers telling me for years, wrap it up, I'm not wrapping it up. And I think that's kind of the thing that's freeing for me as a journalist, as a woman in sports, to be like, we'll take this as long as we need to. We can always edit, we can always take out fluff, but it's so freeing not to have that time clock. So I'm really grateful for the platform. It's been incredible. It's been really fulfilling, I think, on my part is the best word I can think of.
Yeah, I will just jump on that and say it's such an incredible platform because there aren't really gatekeepers here. I started the social media, the podcast. I just went for it, and you don't have to, with podcasting, really wait for a seat at the table. You can build your own table, if you will, or build your own chair and just come up to it. So it's really incredible. And Jackie, I just really appreciate what you and your team are doing to highlight podcasters, because I think everybody on this call can speak to how much effort goes into it. And it's really can be a labor of love. It's a joy, but there's work that goes into it. So thank you for recognizing it and allowing us to continue to do what we do to elevate other people's voices on our shows.
Yeah.
And just to tie all that in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jackie.
No, I was just going to say absolutely. And I was going to ask you guys the question of why do you feel like it's important to have the audio content and the podcasting be recognized? But I didn't feel like there was a need to ask that, because it's kind of like everything we have talked about today answers that question. And what you just said really kind of buttons it up. So thank you for that. Okay, go ahead, Chinny.
No, that's it. I mean, the last little piece I want to throw in there is remember that we are serving something greater than ourselves. If you lead with that, I think you'll have listeners forever. If you serve something greater than yourself, something that people need, you fulfill a need in others, and you highlight the stories that truly matter and uplift those who otherwise wouldn't have platforms to speak or find a way to tie that in there. You'll have listeners forever. So do the work that pours into the people and the communities that we serve. So that's all I would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to thank Caroline, Chinny, Olivia. Thank you so much for your time. You can go to www.sportspodcastawards.com. You can register to vote. You can vote for all the categories, and voting closes March 6th. The winner's announcement will be at the end of March, with obviously more information to come on that specifically. And ladies, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated it. Us women are making strides in sports, making strides in podcasting, and I couldn't be more proud to be on this panel and hosting this with the three of you today. So thank you so very much, and looking forward to seeing all the content come out, keeping up with your shows, keeping up with everything you're doing. Makes me really excited to be in this position. So thank you so much.